Let's talk for a little bit about tillage systems and residue management, looking at the results on the ground after a tillage event. This is a picture from central Illinois. Farmer is drilling corn. After conventional tillage, you can see very little residue left on the surface. You can also see there's a lot of dust blowing. When you plow that much, you break up the aggregates, you pulverize the soil, to use John Deere's words, leaves a degraded surface soil condition. Soil is not covered. Let's switch to the northwest and look at the Idaho Panhandle. Again, you can see a lot of soil blowing around behind these tractors that are planting and plowing up and down the hill. He's planting wheat at the moment. Conventional tillage destroys the surface soil structure, makes it susceptible to erosion. These soils are somewhat abused, but no residue left on the surface because of the conventional tillage, inversion tillage. On the other hand, you can have no-till. In this case, after the wheat's harvested, they haven't done anything to this land. Now, the other thing you'll notice is these slopes are very steep that they're planting on, up to 15%. So if you keep the soils covered, you've got a couple of options. No-till is one, like we just saw. We'll see other examples, and cover crops. So contrast. On the left, dry land, cotton, conventional tillage, and then on the right, irrigated cotton in a no-till system into terminated wheat. So on the left, these rows are about 40 inches apart. Very poor surface soil condition, a lot of crusting. And then on the right, took irrigation to do it in this region. This is Big Spring, Texas. But they irrigated and established a wheat crop. They let it grow through the winter into the spring, and then they terminated it with probably glyphosate. Then they planted cotton into that residue. You're not going to have wind erosion problems in that soil. Well, let's check a field with some peanuts in it then. On the left-hand side, bottom, we see that these peanuts have been dug. The peanut itself grows into the soil, and so you have to dig the plants up to get the peanuts showing. They let them dry for a bit, and then they'll come through, and they will thresh those and take the peanuts with them. Now, you don't see a lot of residue present on the surface, and then after they thresh those, there'll be even less residue available. What does it look like when you take a close-up of the soil itself under conventional tillage? These sandy soils is what you need to produce peanuts in order to be able to dig them. Sandy loams are about as tight as the soil can get and still be able to dig the peanuts with any kind of quality. These sands are kind of red because they're where they are in the southwestern part of the U.S. No residue on the surface other than a little bit of stuff, maybe some old wheat crowns, but all of the other thing that you can see is essentially peanuts. Here's another example of a no-till system, planting soybeans in wheat residue. This one was in Wisconsin. I like the idea. I think it's great, but I do think they went astray on one point. They're planting on an angle instead of along the same rows as the wheat. What happens in this case is you compact more of the soil. So your major amount of compaction occurs the first time you drive a tillage implement, tractor tire, over the soil. When you do this, you're changing the direction that you're running those tires, and so every time you're going through the field, you're trafficking another part of it, and so you're leading to more compaction in the field. controlled wheel traffic is the way to go. Always run your wheels in the same rows. These two pictures were taken on the same day, basically across the road from one another. In this case, it's another clay loam surface soil. The bottom left, conventional tillage, they've disked that probably a few times. They're planting into it. You see a lot of dust. You don't see much residue on the surface. And then in the top right, you see somebody planting in no-till into wheat residue. Not much dust, really good soil cover. When the wind blows, the one in the top right is not going to blow away. The one in the bottom left will have some problems. Now, in places where the water is really limiting, there's not enough precipitation to grow an annual crop. Sometimes they will grow a rotation that allows 2 crops in 3 years. And so there's an 11-month fallow, 11 to 12-month fallow period between those crops. In this case, they'll plant wheat, and then sorghum, and then fallow. So what you can see here is some wheat residue, and they're planting sorghum into that wheat residue. You've still got great surface cover using no-till, and because you've got less evaporation in this case, one of the reasons that they're doing no-till is not just erosion control, but maintaining soil water by reducing evaporation. You increase more stored soil water, and you can actually improve your yields of your following crop. The other option for keeping your soil covered is a cover crop. This one is in Wisconsin, the 3 species cover crop. You can see there's excellent coverage of the soil. Rain, wind are not going to do anything to this soil because it's got a good vegetative cover on top of it. So residue management can be challenging if you're trying to do a no-till system, because if you get high yields, you end up with a large amount of residue. It's difficult to plant through residue, which is one reason that some people choose tillage, because residue in large amounts clogs up the planter or the drill, makes it difficult to work. So sometimes producers use fire as an option there if they don't use tillage. So these wheat crops in the Idaho Panhandle can yield up to 1,000, yield up to 100 bushels per acre. A lot of residue, and so they'll burn that residue before they come and plant their next crop. These soils in the Palouse region, Washington, Oregon, and even the Idaho Panhandle, they're deep, loess soils. They're silts and silt loams, and you can see the aerial view of somebody burning their wheat residues. They leave that soil exposed in that case, and it can lead to some pretty severe erosion challenges. Their wind erosion is not as bad just because the landscape is so rolling. Well, sometimes in the Texas Panhandle and the high plains, also southwest Kansas, that region, under irrigation, they will burn their residues, because you can produce 240 bushel per acre corn, and so they have a lot of residues. They want to get rid of them. They'll burn them. Not everybody, but some producers do. Now, if you want to manage the water flow, strip cropping and contours reduce the effective slope length. You haven't changed the shape of the landscape, so you haven't changed the topography. You're just changing what you're managing. And grass waterways can help slow water movement out of the field. So this is a beautiful example in Wisconsin where they're strip cropping triticale in the foreground, and then corn, and then triticale, and then corn. So as they're going down the slope, breaking that slope up by changing the nature of the crop. Triticale forms a mat very close to the surface as the tillers come up, as opposed to corn, which the plants are much wider spaced within a row, and there's a lot more space for water to move and flow. The triticale, water can't move through that very quickly at all. Now, what if you have a waterway, or you need a waterway? How's one way you know? Look at the field. If you see yellow areas that are low, what you know is that field has some problems with water in it, either due to maybe some erosion as the water is running through that and gathering in those places, or maybe it just stays wetter. But you can see in both cases up here in the top, an area where there's almost nothing growing, and then it's yellow on both sides of it. And then the one down here in the bottom, you can just see a yellow area in a low spot in the field as that drainage way is carrying the water out. Most drainage ways of this nature really need to have some grass put in them to protect them from erosion, and you're getting a loss in your crop production anyway because of the area is too wet, limits oxygen availability to the plant roots. To plan a grass waterway, you'll often start with an aerial photograph, and then constructing it takes some time. There are cost-sharing opportunities, though, through the NRCS for cost-sharing these grass waterways, because they do take a lot of energy and some money to put them in. Here's a great example of a grass waterway. This one is taken in Illinois. You can see that the landscape is going down from where the picture is taken, and these waterways are following the contour, or are moving across the contour and down toward that outlet in the bottom, but they're carrying the water, collecting it, and carrying it away. Now, this system isn't conventional tillage. Don't like that. You can see there's not a lot of residue left on the soil surface. That's not going to be protected with these slopes when you get a high-intensity rainfall event. Now, just for fun, in this Texas High Plains region, these compost windrows that are about 8 to 10 feet tall are the highest point on the landscape. You can see flat and nothing behind it, essentially. And this large device you see here, this scarab, is the piece of equipment that's used to turn these compost rows. This compost is made with cotton gin trash and beef cattle manure. And then again, for fun, you may have seen in the movie Cars, there was a background shot that is a hint to the Cadillac Ranch. You might look that up, where an eccentric rich man in the area, oil man, buried Cadillacs in the nose first, so you could look at the differences in the tail fin design over several years. Well, some producer, farmer, had some old combines and thought that's a cool idea, and so he started planting combines. This is when there were 3. I think they're up to 12 different combines that have been planted in the ground like this. But again, if you look in the background, this area is extremely flat. And you also don't see trees, because there are no native trees to that part of the world. That's a short look at residues and what happens when you plow and what happens when you don't.